Today, we're looking at a young family in Brampton, Ontario who, in the spring of 2021, seemed like any other new immigrant couple trying to build a quiet, stable life. Long work hours, a modest home, and a baby boy who was the center of their world. But one night, the small Wi-Fi baby monitor they used to watch their son while he slept, a simple nursery camera almost every new parent owns, recorded something no one inside that house ever expected. That recording set off a chain of events their neighbors could never have imagined. This is the case of Viraj Mundal, Nayani Desai, and the baby camera that changed everything. When acquaintances spoke about the Mundal family, they typically used simple, steady descriptions. They called them quiet, focused, and hard-working people trying to establish a stable life in a new country. There was nothing dramatic or unusual in how they lived, and nothing in their routines suggested conflict or instability. For most observers, they appeared to be a young couple doing what thousands of other immigrant families in Canada were doing, working, raising a child, and adapting to a different culture without much outside support. Viraj and Nayani had arrived from Ahmedabad 3 years earlier, part of a growing community of South Asian families settling in the Greater Toronto area. Their move had been planned for years. They wanted better career opportunities and long-term security, and Canada seemed like the safest choice. They rented a small townhouse on a quiet cul-de-sac in Brampton. The neighborhood was modest, with similar attached homes, trimmed lawns, and families who mostly kept to themselves. Shortly after settling in, their son, Arav, was born. His arrival coincided with the early stages of the pandemic, which intensified their isolation and limited their contact with others. They handled parenthood the way many new parents do, through exhaustion, trial and error, and a constant effort to keep things functioning. The stress was real, but so were the small victories that made the work feel worthwhile. Inside the townhouse, the layout was simple. A narrow hallway led to a carpeted staircase. The second floor had 3 compact bedrooms arranged side by side. The baby's room was the smallest but the most carefully arranged. It had a soft night lamp, a white crib, and a Wi-Fi baby monitor mounted in the corner. The camera was nothing unusual. Most of their friends with newborns had the same type. It gave them peace of mind, especially during the long nights when one of them needed to rest while the other managed the baby's schedule. At that stage, life in the Mundal home was stable. Viraj worked as a logistics analyst for a distribution company, often staying late to manage shipments and scheduling issues. He wasn't ambitious in a flashy sense, but he was consistent, and that consistency kept the household running. His income covered rent, bills, groceries, and the additional costs of raising an infant. The long hours did not bother him. He saw them as necessary for the family's future. Meanwhile, Nayani stayed at home with Arav. The adjustment was difficult for her, but she managed the daily tasks, feeding, cleaning, nap schedules, and keeping the house in order. She sometimes felt overwhelmed, especially with no relatives nearby to offer support, but she maintained a routine that kept the child comfortable and the home functioning. If she struggled, she rarely expressed it. The isolation that comes with new motherhood is common, and for her, it was intensified by the distance from family and familiar surroundings. Weekends offered their only form of relaxation. They cooked simple meals: dal, rice, vegetables, and video called their parents and siblings in India. These calls often lasted hours, and they helped anchor the couple in a sense of continuity. Afterward, they took slow walks around the neighborhood with the stroller, moving in silence or exchanging minor updates about the week. Nothing in these walks suggested deeper tension. They appeared unified in the effort of raising a child in a foreign country. Their home environment reflected ordinary life. There were no heated arguments, no unexplained absences, no visible signs of strain. Visitors described the house as calm and functional. Even in moments of fatigue, both parents tried to maintain a stable environment for their son. The camera in the nursery quietly recorded each night, its purpose strictly practical: monitoring sleep, offering reassurance, and giving them a sense of control in a period marked by constant uncertainty. At this stage, there were no clear indicators of danger. No financial stress beyond the normal challenges of a young family. No unusual behaviors that would draw outside concern. Nothing that pointed to betrayal, conflict, or violence. From the outside, they appeared to be adapting just like any other couple navigating early parenthood and the pressures of immigration. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. But the absence of obvious problems does not mean the absence of risk. In many families, early warning signs are subtle, almost invisible. They enter slowly, unnoticed, and can remain undetected for months. Small shifts in routine, minor changes in behavior, and moments of unexplained tension often precede deeper fractures. These tensions rarely announce themselves, they accumulate quietly until they become impossible to ignore. Inside the Mundell home, those early shifts had not yet surfaced. The household still operated normally. The camera still served its intended purpose. And no one, not neighbors, not relatives, not even the couple themselves, had reason to imagine that this ordinary device would eventually capture events that would redefine the entire story of the family. At this point, nothing suggested the tragedy that would come later. Everything still looked like a typical life, still functioning, still intact, still safe. The truth had not begun to surface yet. The first signs of change inside the Mundell home were subtle. Nothing dramatic, nothing that immediately indicated a serious problem. They were the kind of small behavioral shifts that most partners overlook in the moment, especially when daily life is already filled with stress, fatigue, and routine. For Viraj, these early indications did not form a pattern yet. They simply appeared as isolated moments that he brushed aside. One of the first changes involved Nayani's daily outings. She began announcing that she was taking long walks with the baby. These outings lasted much longer than before, often stretching past an hour. At first, it seemed like a healthy habit: fresh air, exercise, a reason to step away from the house. But eventually, something felt off. Each time she returned, the stroller wheels were completely clean. Even after heavy rainfall, there was no mud, water streaks, or any indication that she had pushed it across sidewalks or pathways. It was a small inconsistency, but it stayed in his mind. Her appearance also shifted. When she left the house, she dressed with noticeably more attention to detail than usual. The changes were not extreme, but they were deliberate. She applied makeup even for short trips. She selected outfits more carefully. When he casually asked where she was going or what errand she needed to run, she avoided responding directly, providing vague explanations that offered no real information. These omissions were new, and they interrupted the sense of transparency that had previously existed. Phone behavior became the next point of concern. Incoming calls increased, and she answered them immediately. She always stepped into the hallway, lowering her voice. Her tone stayed low and controlled, making it impossible for him to understand the content. The calls ended as soon as he approached. If he asked who it was, the response was brief, just a friend, followed by a quick change of subject. The pattern repeated enough times that it no longer felt accidental. When he finally attempted to address the growing tension, the conversation escalated quickly. He asked a simple question: whether everything was all right. Her response was sharp and defensive: "Stop hovering. I need space." The tone was unfamiliar. She had never spoken to him with that level of irritation before. It was not the words alone, but the abruptness in her voice that unsettled him. This reaction turned a vague concern into something more concrete. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere inside the house changed. Daily routines continued, but they felt strained. Dinner conversations became shorter and increasingly one-sided. Nayani often kept her eyes on her phone, scrolling or reading something she did not share. She seemed distracted, detached, and uninterested in engaging. Small responsibilities around the house were left undone. Explanations for her absences grew inconsistent, and she offered them with a level of impatience that made further questioning difficult. None of these shifts were large enough to prompt confrontation, but together they altered the household dynamic. The quiet, structured environment that once defined their home began to feel uncertain. Even the baby's presence, usually a unifying factor, did little to reduce the distance forming between them. The moment that changed everything occurred late at night. Around 1 a.m., Araf cried briefly. The sound was not unusual and usually required only a quick check. Instead of getting up, Viraj reached for his phone and opened the baby camera app to see whether the child had settled back to sleep. He expected to see the crib and nothing more. Instead, the live feed showed movement in the living room. The camera captured a partial angle through the open doorway. In the frame, he saw his wife walking slowly across the room, holding her phone close to her mouth. Her voice was low but audible enough for certain words to stand out. "He doesn't suspect anything. Just come later. And not through the front door." The statement was clear, unambiguous, and entirely unexpected. The tone was controlled, as if she had rehearsed the instruction. The content raised immediate questions. Who was she talking to? What was she planning? Why mention the front door at all? A physical reaction followed before he could fully process the meaning. A cold sensation moved through him, a clear signal that something had shifted beyond ordinary marital stress. He rewound the feed to confirm what he heard, but the clip was identical. The words remained the same. He did not confront her that night. She returned to the bedroom shortly afterward, unaware that he had seen or heard anything unusual. He remained silent, choosing to observe rather than react. The certainty of doubt had entered the house. It was quiet but decisive, settling into the space between them. The shift was complete. After the night he overheard the whispered conversation through the baby camera, Viraj's behavior changed significantly. The device, originally installed to monitor his son's sleep, became his primary source of information. It was no longer about checking on the baby, it became a tool for understanding what was happening inside his own home when he wasn't present or when he was asleep. He began relying on it because it provided objective evidence in a situation where verbal communication with his wife had deteriorated. Each night, once the house was quiet and his wife had gone to bed, he opened the camera app and scrolled through the recorded footage. The process was repetitive and slow. Most nights, he saw nothing unusual: a dark room, minor movement as the baby shifted positions, the glow from the nightlight against the crib. The monotony only sharpened his attention. He watched carefully, hoping to find clarity or reassurance that the unusual behavior he had seen earlier was a one-time occurrence. However, on some recordings, he picked up short phrases spoken by his wife when she believed no one was listening. These statements were fragmented but concerning. He heard, "Don't knock," followed on another night by, "He won't wake up," and "Go upstairs, there's no camera there." These lines were not mistakes or ambiguous noises. They were sentences with clear meaning, implying coordination with someone else and the existence of movements in the house he was not aware of. His reaction was physical tightness in the chest, elevated pulse, a growing sense of alarm. The recordings raised two immediate questions: was someone entering their home late at night? And if so, why was his wife facilitating it? The possibility of infidelity crossed his mind, but the idea of someone physically entering the house at night created an additional, more serious concern. This was not just emotional betrayal, it suggested a security issue inside their own living space. When he attempted to raise these issues directly with Naomi, the conversation escalated quickly. She dismissed his concerns entirely, not with explanations but with accusations. She told him he was imagining things, that he was paranoid, that his constant questions were controlling and suffocating. She framed his monitoring as an invasion of privacy, even though the device had been installed for their child. The aggression in her responses stood out. Rather than reducing his suspicion, her defensiveness intensified it. The verbal exchanges provided no clarity, and each attempt to talk only widened the gap between them. Meanwhile, the camera recordings continued to produce irregularities that could not be easily explained. The more inconsistencies he found, the more he depended on surveillance as the only reliable source of truth. Faced with a lack of answers and increasing tension, he took a step he had not previously considered. He purchased a small, discreet camera, one that looked like a decorative object or a household gadget. He placed it on the hallway bookshelf, angling it toward the entryway and the staircase. The location allowed it to capture the most critical areas without being noticed. The decision was not made lightly. He understood the implications of installing hidden surveillance inside his own home. But he justified it as a necessary measure. If nothing was wrong, the footage would simply be deleted. He operated under a practical assumption: evidence would either confirm his concerns or eliminate them. He didn't expect the camera to catch anything immediately. His intention was to observe for a short period and then decide whether further action was needed. Once installed, the second camera became part of a nightly routine. He checked both devices, synchronizing the footage, looking for gaps between the spaces each camera covered. Over time, he found slight irregularities, soft noises, shadows, and moments when his wife moved through the hallway without clear purpose. None of these were definitive, but they pointed toward activity he could not account for. The hidden camera created a new form of surveillance that extended beyond the nursery. It opened a view into the central areas of the house that the baby monitor did not cover. As the days passed, he felt both anticipation and dread, sensing that something significant would eventually appear on the recordings. The spiral was now fully in motion. Communication had broken down. Trust had fractured. Evidence, not conversation, was steering his decisions. He continued watching, reviewing, and waiting. It would not take long for the second camera to record something that would confirm his worst fears and turn suspicion into irreversible consequences. The turning point occurred on a Thursday at 1:47 a.m., when the hidden hallway camera detected movement near the front entrance. The footage showed a faint shadow passing along the lower portion of the frame. A few seconds later, quiet footsteps became audible, consistent with someone attempting to move inside the house without drawing attention. The door had been unlocked earlier, and there were no signs of forced entry. A tall man stepped into the townhouse. His posture indicated familiarity with the layout. He did not hesitate or pause to orient himself. He closed the door carefully behind him and walked deeper into the hallway with deliberate, slow steps. Nothing in his behavior suggested hesitation or surprise. Within moments, Naomi entered the frame. She did not display any signs of alarm or confusion. She raised her hand slightly, signaling him to reduce noise, and directed him toward the staircase. Her body language showed coordination rather than fear. She turned and began walking upstairs, and the man followed her without verbal communication. Their movement was direct and intentional. The staircase led to the second-floor landing where the bedrooms were located. At that hour, the only person awake on the upper floor was the baby, intermittently shifting in his crib. The camera recorded the sound of soft footsteps moving upward, followed by a brief pause as the individuals reached the landing. At approximately 1:52 a.m., the hallway camera captured muffled voices from the top of the stairs. The words were unclear, but the tone suggested tension. A low argument began, escalating from whispers to audible disagreement. The disturbance woke Viraj, who had been asleep in one of the bedrooms. He stepped into the hallway moments later. The hallway lights were off, but the glow from a nearby nightlight provided enough illumination to identify the figures in front of him. He saw a man he did not recognize standing near the top of the staircase. The presence of this stranger inside his home, at that hour, triggered immediate alarm. He demanded explanations from both the man and his wife. The questions were direct. Who was this person, and why was he in their house? The man, later identified as Kavish Raval, attempted to move past him without responding. His objective appeared to be leaving the situation quickly. Viraj stepped in front of him, blocking his path. The confrontation shifted rapidly from verbal to physical. Kavish pushed forward, trying to bypass him on the narrow landing. The space allowed little room for maneuvering. When Kavish made a sudden, forceful shove, it created an imbalance. The push was not controlled. It appeared driven by panic and urgency rather than intent to cause lethal harm. However, the landing opened directly onto the staircase. The moment the shove connected, Viraj lost footing. The hidden camera recorded his body falling backward down the full length of the stairs. The impact at the bottom was severe. The sound of his skull striking the final step was sharp and unmistakable, indicating immediate and catastrophic injury. In the seconds that followed, the camera documented the reaction. Naomi froze at the top of the stairs, staring downward without moving. Her initial reaction was shock, not action. Kavish remained near her, breathing heavily. Neither of them attempted to descend the stairs to check on Viraj. After several seconds, she whispered, "We say he fell. You weren't here. No one needs to know." The statement was recorded clearly, with no ambiguity regarding its meaning. It represented a deliberate plan to present the event as an accidental fall, despite the recorded evidence showing otherwise. In the nursery, the baby monitor continued to operate as usual. Its small indicator light blinked steadily, documenting both the fall and the conversation that followed. The footage captured all critical moments leading up to and immediately following the incident. The fatal sequence lasted less than 6 minutes from the time the man entered the house to the moment of impact. It was a rapid escalation from secrecy to confrontation to irreversible harm. Paramedics arrived within minutes of the 911 call. The initial assessment began in the narrow hallway at the base of the staircase, where Viraj lay unconscious with severe head trauma. While the medical team worked on stabilizing him, the responding officers began routine questioning. These early questions quickly exposed inconsistencies in Naomi's account of events. She stated that she had found her husband at the bottom of the stairs after hearing a loud noise. However, officers immediately questioned why the front door was unlocked at nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. She could not provide a clear explanation. When asked to indicate the exact point on the staircase where she believed he had slipped, she hesitated and offered vague answers. Her statements changed slightly each time she attempted to clarify. Inside the kitchen, an officer noted 2 glasses on the countertop, one recently used, with condensation still visible. When asked who had been drinking with her, she claimed she had poured a second glass earlier in the evening but never touched it. The explanation did not match what officers observed, but they continued documenting the scene. As paramedics prepared to move Viraj, one officer asked about cameras in the home. The baby monitor was clearly visible in the nursery, and its indicator light was functioning. The hallway camera, although discreet, was also noticed. When questioned, Naomi insisted that the devices weren't working and that they had not been used for weeks. She claimed they had malfunctioned and she simply hadn't bothered to fix them. Her responses were brief and appeared rehearsed, raising suspicion. Despite her statements, the officers secured the devices as potential evidence. All modern baby monitors, including the one in the Mundell home, automatically upload footage to cloud storage. When detectives accessed the system, they quickly discovered that the recordings were intact. Nothing had been deleted or corrupted. The timeline of the incident was fully preserved. Detectives reviewed the footage in chronological order. The first clip showed a man entering the house through the unlocked door at 1:47 a.m. The next recordings captured movement on the staircase, confirming that both the man and Naomi went upstairs moments before the confrontation. Additional audio from the hallway camera recorded the escalation of the argument, followed by the shove and the fall. The final piece of evidence was the whispered statement, "We say he fell. You weren't here. No one needs to know." These elements formed a continuous, unbroken sequence. There were no gaps or ambiguous segments. The footage directly contradicted every part of the narrative Naomi had given to first responders. It established not only the presence of another individual in the home but also intent to mislead investigators about what had occurred. Detectives identified the man in the footage as Kavish Raval, a former colleague of Naomi. His arrest was executed within 24 hours at his apartment. During the search of his residence, officers recovered his phone. A forensic examination revealed extensive communication between him and Naomi over several months. Many messages had been deleted, but metadata and recovery tools showed patterns of contact late at night, coordinated visits, and discussions about meeting when the house was quiet. Call logs confirmed consistent communication during hours when Viraj was typically asleep or at work. Investigators also found evidence indicating that their relationship had progressed beyond casual contact, and that Naomi had discussed future plans that did not involve her husband. The collected evidence eliminated any possibility that the incident had been accidental. The presence of Kavish in the home, the coordinated movement upstairs, the physical confrontation, the immediate attempt to create a false narrative, and the concealed communication between the two all pointed to deliberate misconduct. The cameras had provided a complete account of events, objective, time-stamped, and impossible to dispute. The attempt to hide the truth lasted only minutes. The digital record preserved everything that words attempted to obscure. The truth, fully documented, could no longer be buried. The legal process moved slowly, beginning with preliminary hearings and eventually progressing to a full trial that lasted almost a year. From the outset, prosecutors focused on two central claims: that the shove delivered by Kavish met the legal threshold for manslaughter, and that both defendants made deliberate efforts to obstruct the investigation immediately after the incident. The prosecution's case relied heavily on digital evidence, particularly the footage recorded by the two cameras inside the home. The video sequence became the core of the trial. It provided a precise, time-stamped account of events: the unauthorized entry, the coordinated movement upstairs, the confrontation, the physical altercation, the fall, and the immediate verbal attempt to create a false narrative. Unlike cases that involve witness testimony subject to memory lapses or interpretation, this incident had a continuous digital record. Jurors did not have to rely on inference; they could watch the events unfold exactly as they happened. The defense attempted to argue that the shove had been a reflexive act without intent to harm, emphasizing panic and confusion. They also suggested that Nayani's statements were made under emotional distress, not as part of a coordinated plan. However, the video contradicted these claims. The footage showed controlled behavior from both individuals prior to the confrontation. It also captured the immediate discussion of how to misrepresent the incident. These elements weakened the defense's argument significantly. Prosecutors presented additional evidence recovered from Kavish's phone. Communication records demonstrated months of concealed contact and coordination between him and Nayani. Although many messages were deleted, enough data remained to show a consistent pattern of late-night interaction. The prosecution portrayed this as context for motive and as proof that both individuals were acting together on the night of the incident. Medical testimony established that the fall caused fatal head trauma, consistent with the impact documented in the footage. Forensic analysis of the staircase and surrounding area ruled out the possibility of an accidental slip. The combination of medical data and video evidence left little room for alternative interpretations. After weeks of testimony, expert reports, and digital reconstruction, the jury returned its verdict. Kavish was found guilty of manslaughter and obstruction of justice. The sentencing phase reflected the seriousness of causing a death combined with immediate efforts to mislead investigators. He received 12 years in federal custody. Nayani faced separate charges. Her conviction included obstruction of justice, providing false statements, and contributing to the circumstances that led to the death. The court considered her actions before and after the fall, including her attempt to direct the narrative and her failure to seek immediate, truthful assistance. She was sentenced to 8 years. Custody arrangements for the child were addressed shortly after sentencing. Arav, who had been only 9 months old at the time of the incident, was placed with relatives of Viraj in Surrey. Social services determined that this environment provided stability and continuity. The court ruled that neither parent would retain guardianship during or after incarceration without further review. In reviewing the case, investigators and legal professionals noted the unusual role of technology. The baby camera and the hallway device were originally installed for routine household safety. Instead, they became the most critical pieces of evidence in determining the sequence of events. Without them, the initial story might have been accepted as an accidental fall. The cameras provided clarity that verbal accounts could not. The broader conclusion of the case was straightforward: technology documented what individuals attempted to hide. The device meant to protect an infant ended up capturing the destruction of the entire household. The contrast between the intended purpose, comfort, reassurance, and security, and the eventual role it played underscored the central theme noted by investigators. Cameras don't lie. People do. And in this case, the camera delivered the only accurate account of what happened inside the Mundell home that night.